This is a Fox News alert. Chicago police just announced a dramatic development in the Jussie Smollett case. Smollett is no longer considered the victim of a crime. Indeed, just seconds ago, he was charged felony charges for filing a false police report. We're going to have all the developments in this fast-breaking story in just moments. Amazing, though, the difference between tonight and just a week ago. Conventional wisdom turned on its head, as so often happens. Good evening, by the way, and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. First, we want to ask you this question. Have you ever noticed the weird compulsion in people, a lot of people, to pretend that they're the opposite of who they obviously are? Jussie Smollett would be one example, but it's everywhere, and it's especially prevalent in politics. It's ubiquitous in the Democratic Party. Just a few weeks ago, one Democratic politician who'd worn blackface demanded the resignation of another Democratic politician for the crime of, yes, wearing blackface. That's more than hypocrisy. It's really an escape and evasion scheme. You escape scrutiny and evade punishment by accusing other people of doing exactly what you yourself are doing, but on a much grander scale. The people calling you a thief are picking your pocket. The ones calling you an adulterer are hitting on your wife. The ones claiming you're immoral are themselves deeply worried about spending eternity in flames, and probably for good reason. It's the Bill Clinton as feminist scam. We could give you a million examples. But the living embodiment of this syndrome, the all-time Grand Prix triple gold medal winner in the category, turns out to be running for president of the United States. It's Kirsten Gillibrand, the junior senator from New York. Now, Gillibrand is interesting not because there's a chance she will become the president. She won't. Gillibrand is fascinating because she so perfectly embodies the attitudes and the vanities of the modern Democratic Party and of our ruling class more broadly. If you want to know what they're thinking in the faculty lounge at Wesleyan, or out in Silicon Valley, or in Hollywood, watch Kirsten Gillibrand. She's who they all are. Like all of them, Gillibrand rarely utters a sentence anymore without some form of moral judgment. She appears to have retired from politics, actually. She's a preacher now.
This country was founded on some basic moral principles, that we have a moral compass as a nation. Our morality as a country is literally on a knife's edge.
For me, it's really a moral question. For me, it's very much a moral question. I've been called to fight as hard as I possibly can to restore that moral integrity, that moral decency.
Moral integrity, moral decency. It would be interesting to know if Gillibrand gave that lecture to her old friend Harvey Weinstein, or to her pal, disgraced New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Schneiderman, by the way, now stands accused of beating women and calling his Sri Lankan girlfriend a, quote, brown slave. Did she mention that to him? Did the question of moral principles ever come up during the time that Gillibrand spent with her mentor, Bill Clinton? Probably not. In fact, it's not exactly clear how Gillibrand or any of these people define the word moral. A couple of months ago, Gillibrand gave us a hint. Our future, she wrote in a tweet, is, quote, female, intersectional, powered by our belief in one another. Do you have any idea what any of that means? Gillibrand likely doesn't. No one's asked her to explain. They're afraid to ask her anything. Why? Because Gillibrand is a victim now. Bet you didn't know that she is. She's shielded from the scrutiny the rest of us received. She announced her new status as a victim just last week in a fundraising pitch. Quote, I'm already facing questions about my likability and tone, Gillibrand wrote. Sexism is already bubbling into the narrative around our campaign. But I certainly won't stop fighting for a country that values and respects women. Will you add your name to reject sexism in our political system? Get it? Kirsten Gillibrand is now oppressed. You wouldn't know that by looking. In fact, she seems like one of the most powerful people in the world. She's a U.S. senator and a presidential candidate. She went to a pricey all-girls boarding school, and then an Ivy League college, and then law school. And then she used political connections to get a prestigious legal clerkship, and then she got her Senate seat without really running for it. That all seems like a pretty high level of privilege. But no, despite a life of wealth and connections, Kirsten Gillibrand is now telling us she is oppressed. Who are her oppressors? Well, they're you and me, and anyone else who doesn't support her campaign for president. We're guilty of sexism. She's the victim of it. You won't be surprised to learn that Kirsten Gillibrand was one of the very first politicians to side with Jussie Smollett. She could empathize with another pampered rich person fighting for victimhood status. When the next hate hoax comes along, Gillibrand will probably tweet support of that, too. She can't resist a fad. Wherever the political opportunities are, she is there, too, in lockstep. Gillibrand once supported a balanced budget amendment. Now she backs the Green New Deal. She once bragged about keeping 2 guns under her bed. She had an A rating from the NRA. Now she wants to ban rifles. She says the NRA is not simply wrong, but evil.
The NRA has a chokehold on Congress. The NRA is concerned only with gun sales. It is literally all about money. It is all about greed. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. It's the power of money. It's the power of communications. It's the fear they instill in members. And it's wrong. It's morally wrong.
There it is again. It's morally wrong. The beauty of declaring something morally wrong rather than just misguided or ineffective is that you can't really argue with a moral absolute. You can only obey a moral absolute. And that's, of course, the point of laying it down. As a member of Congress not so long many years ago, Gillibrand said she believed in borders. She promised to crack down on sanctuary cities. She opposed awarding driver's licenses to illegal aliens. That was then. Now she wants to abolish ICE.
I don't think ICE today is working as intended.
Well, you think you should get rid of the agency?
I believe that it has become a deportation force, and I think you should separate the criminal justice from the immigration issues, and I think you should reimagine ICE. And that's why I believe you should get rid of it, start over, reimagine it, and build something that actually works.
You can see her trying to remember the talking points there. Don't get her confused. Reimagine ICE. But she got a little over her skis. It turned out that when she said that, banning ICE wasn't very popular even among Democratic voters. So Gillibrand lurched back and said she didn't really want to get rid of ICE, though as you saw, she'd proposed exactly that. But now, just a few months later, she's lurching back again. Abolishing ICE? That qualifies as centrism in the Democratic Party right now. So Gillibrand needs something more radical than that if she wants to be considered the progressive candidate. And this week she found it. Gillibrand proclaimed that border security is immoral because it impedes the movement of indigenous peoples into our country, which apparently is really their country. Watch.
On immigration, I mean, there's a crisis going on at the border right now.
What if we need to have proper asylum? This president doesn't believe in asylum. He's afraid of immigrants. He's afraid of refugees.
And I just want to note that a lot of these people are indigenous to this land, and that border is cutting them off.
I know, that's why the wall is so absurd and hurtful.
Just who are these indigenous people? Who knows? As long as they're female and intersectional, Kirsten Gillibrand believes they're our future. Jonathan Harris is a Democratic political analyst, and he joins us. Mr. Harris, thanks very much for coming on. So who are these indigenous people who we can't keep out? Are they citizens? Are they non-citizens? What does that mean?
So I think what she was referring to, and it isn't even her that said it. It was the activist that she was
talking to. But she nodded and said that's why walls are so hurtful.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was kind of nodding before. I'm not sure she was necessarily agreeing, but if she was, I think what she's referring to is that I think it was like in the mid-1800s, for example, in Texas, that was an independent nation, and it was shared by European settlers as well as Mexican settlers. So they were sharing land together, and then Europeans kind of forced Mexicans out, and then that was duplicated again in California and so on and so forth. So I think what she's talking about is the reality that a lot of the people that are now outside of the country are actually descended from actual indigenous people.
Who used to live there dead?
I said descended from. So descended from.
So does that mean that if your ancestors lived in a place, you have a right to go there and use their social programs for free?
It just means that you're descended from people who are indigenous people.
But the woman who Gillibrand was talking to said it's wrong to put a border wall up because it would keep people who are indigenous to the region out. Right. And Gillibrand said that's absolutely right. That's why they're so hurtful. And so what they're saying is that if your ancestors lived in a place that you have, by definition, genetic citizenship or something there, is that true, do you think? Or is that insane?
Well, I mean, I don't think that's what Gillibrand was saying. I think that might have been what the activist was saying, but I don't think that's what she was agreeing with, because what she said right after that is going back to her talking points. We need to have asylum. We need to have the wall is immoral, things like that. So I don't know that she necessarily agrees with that.
Because, but that is an argument.
But that is a factual statement. I mean,
what's a factual statement? That populations have moved around the globe for like thousands of years. Right. But as long as we're saying that if your ancestors, I guess if you take a DNA test or something.
But I mean, that works, right? Because if I have a child or you have a child outside of the U.S., they're still considered American citizens based on...
That's because you are a citizen.
Right.
So citizenship is not a genetic category, because this isn't, and despite what people say, an inherently racist nation. As soon as you decide that genes are what give you claim to living here,
no, and I don't.
Then that's a different thing.
I reiterate, I don't think that's what Gillibrand was agreeing to. I think she was just agreeing to the fact that many of those people, had they not been pushed out or had they not been robbed of their land, the people that are there now are descendants of those people.
Well, I doubt that Gillibrand knows anything about the history of the region or really anything else, actually. She said recently that the 14th Amendment gave women the right to vote. So, I mean, let's not overstate her knowledge. But
I could go down a laundry list of things Trump has said.
Sure, and I'm not here to defend the ignorance of politicians. I'm merely saying I doubt she knows much about the history of that region. But I just think it's important to establish a principle. If you're a citizen, you have a right to be here, and if you're not, you don't.
Agreed, of course.
Okay,
of course.
Gillibrand doesn't agree with that. So what do you make, just more broadly, of her new posture as a victim, someone who grew up this privileged life is now telling us that she's a victim of sexism?
I don't think she's. See, I think the right
said
does
that.
Well, I think the right does that a lot. I think the right mounted this horse in the 80s of the moral majority, and everything was a moral issue. People couldn't get married. People couldn't do these things in their private lives.
No.
No, the right did that. That was
let
their
me just be clear. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm not here to lecture you about your moral failings.
Right, but
at
the
all.
GOP,
maybe whatever. But I'm just saying right now, Gillibrand is saying this is one of the most powerful people in the world, just like Jussie Smollett. Rich person.
But see, there's no correlation.
And they're both, well, sure. I mean,
there's no correlation.
There is this trend of powerful people claiming that they're victims.
I think there's a difference.
And the people oppressing them are poorer and less popular than they are.
No, I think there's a difference between highlighting something you may be the victim of, right? Like Hillary Clinton had a very different road than Donald Trump, and a lot of it tied into sexism. She's not calling herself a victim.
Yeah,
she's just saying, no, she's not. She's just saying, this is what I had to deal with. Can you say that without being can you highlight your own struggle without calling yourself? Is that even possible?
Yeah, I think you should actually be quiet about your own struggle. If you're as powerful as Hillary Clinton is, I do think that. Or if you're as powerful as I am, there are a lot of things I don't like. I try not to whine about it too much because I'm successful and I don't believe in whining.
But do you understand that what they're doing when Hillary Clinton does that? Obviously, she said many times, it can't hurt me, but there are a lot of women who go through that. There are a lot of people that represents.
You know what's going on. This is powerful people pretending to be powerless because it shields them from criticism.
I don't see her as calling herself a victim. I think she's just saying, this is what I'm going through.
I hope you're right. Jonathan Harris, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Well, like most of the Democratic Party's 2020 candidates, Elizabeth Warren is running fast to position herself at the left end of the Democratic spectrum. That's a position she comfortably held for years until the party itself went insane, and that left Warren looking dangerously moderate. So yesterday, Warren unveiled a plan for a universal state-run, taxpayer-funded daycare scheme in the United States. Warren wants 12 million kids to participate in this daycare plan. That would be 60% of all children under 5 in America. In a speech shortly before revealing her plan, Warren said universal daycare, quote, is about what each of our children is entitled to, not just the children of the wealthy, not just the children of the well-connected, but every one of our children is entitled to good child care. Let's take this seriously. Warren has it exactly backward. Children are not entitled to government daycare. What children are entitled to is love from their own parents. Now, Warren herself used to know this very well. 15 years ago, she wrote an entire book making that case. The book was called The Two-Income Trap, and honestly, it's excellent. And I say that as a non-liberal. It's great. In that book, Warren argues that American families have been decimated by the mass exodus of mothers into the workforce. As a result, children are less cared for. Mothers are far less happy. And thanks to wage stagnation and rising prices, families are not actually better off economically. She proves that point in that book. You should read it. Many families are worse off. And that's one of the main reasons that Americans are having fewer children than they used to. And they're having far fewer children than they say they want to have. But they have no choice. They can't afford it. The kids they produce are likely to be less successful, and our rising rates of drug addiction and suicide and joblessness attest to that fact. The American family has been crushed by the changing American economy, and nobody wants to admit it. But 15 years ago, Elizabeth Warren did admit it, and she was deeply troubled by it. Good for her. That was the old Elizabeth Warren. Now Warren wants to be president, so she's gone corporate. That's where the money is. The new Elizabeth Warren argues that the American dream is not raising your own children. The American dream is outsourcing their upbringing to government caretakers while their parents scurry back to work as good little servants of globalized market capitalism. The need for more government daycare specialists will no doubt be used to justify more immigration. And so the cycle, as you can see, is complete. The Democratic Party started by outsourcing manufacturing, you remember that. Then they outsourced farm labor and yard work, and now they've decided to outsource parenting. Raising your own kids, Elizabeth Warren is telling us, is a job Americans just won't do. Breaking news tonight in the Jussie Smollett case. Seconds before the show began, Smollett was charged with a felony in Chicago. Matt Finn has the live update to what is happening in that story after the break.
888-514-2758.
Pretty amazing case of breaking news tonight in the Jussie Smollett story, the hate hoax that he apparently perpetrated. New surveillance footage prior to the attack has come out. And just moments ago, police formally charged Smollett with a felony. A lot going on. Matt Finn is here from Chicago. Police headquarters to sort it out for us. Matt?
Tucker, Smollett formally charged with filing a false police report, which carries up to a 3-year sentence here in Illinois. Chicago police say their detectives today presented their evidence to a grand jury in the courthouse behind me. And also the Osundaro brothers attorney says that the brothers testified before this grand jury for 2.5 hours today. The Osundaro brothers attorney says the brothers do not have a plea deal or immunity. That's not why they're cooperating, according to the attorney. The attorney says you, quote, don't need a plea deal when you have the truth. The brothers' attorney also says she does not know how Jussie Smollett is sleeping at night, and she is urging Jussie Smollett to cooperate with authorities. Also, the brothers' attorney says her clients don't feel pressured or manipulated by this Hollywood actor, but would not expand on why they got involved in this alleged hoax. The brothers' attorney also says she does not expect charges against her clients. She would also says that the brothers will reveal their truth eventually. We also obtained a new video showing the brothers apparently purchasing the black masks and red hats at a hardware store. The surveillance video shows them doing that. The ball tonight is now in Jussie Smollett's court. It will depend on what type of strategy his legal team is advising him. We do know that Chicago police requested last Saturday that Jussie Smollett answer a couple more of their questions after the Osundaro brothers gave some type of testimony that dramatically altered this case. But as of this moment, it appears that Smollett has not cooperated with police, and Smollett is also facing federal charges because the FBI is investigating that he alleged death threat letter that he received 1 week prior to this hoax. And if he lies to federal authorities, or if he had any part in that letter, he could be in trouble with the FBI as well. Tucker.
Matt Finn in Chicago. I've got to wonder if he'll be arrested in a pre-dawn raid by dozens of armed agents. Oh, wait, he's not. Roger Stone. Thanks, Matt. Libby Locke is an attorney who's been involved in a number of high-profile cases like this, and she joins us tonight for some perspective. Libby, thanks very much for coming on. So first, if you would give us some sense of what the charge is against Jussie Smollett and the penalty for it, potentially.
Sure. So, Tucker, it sounds like Mr. Smollett has been charged with giving a false report to the police. As your reporter just noted, that there's a possible 3-year sentence that Mr. Smollett could face for jail time. And this is a very serious charge. And in my perspective, these kinds of hoaxes, if Mr. Smollett did in fact make up this allegation and did in fact engage in this reporting to the police and wasted police resources, he should in fact go to jail and spend time in jail. Too many of these hoaxes are not prosecuted, and we need some deterrence here.
So that really kind of is the point. I mean, there's a long list of people who've been hurt by these hoaxes. But seems a pretty short list of the people who've been held accountable for perpetrating them. Can you think of another example where someone's gone to prison for something like this?
I can't. We dealt with this in the Rolling Stone case that we prosecuted, yes. The UVA, the fake gang rape that a woman on campus told to a reporter at Rolling Stone. Now, she did not make a false report to the police. She never reported that rape to the police, and therefore the police didn't have a basis to bring charges against that woman. Here, that's very different than Mr. Smollett. If he in fact made up this attack and reported it to police, that is a basis for not only state charges, but also federal charges if any of the conduct that he engaged in impacted interstate commerce or was in interstate commerce. Then there's a federal angle to that too.
It's so interesting, though, that it's not simply a question of how the police respond, law enforcement responds, but also the people covering it, the press. There is this instinct to protect the false accuser, the person spreading hatred and fear and distrust in our society. In the case that you were involved in at UVA in Charlottesville, Virginia, the woman who made the false claims was protected, in effect, by the Washington Post and other media outlets for a long time. I never understood why.
Yeah, her anonymity was protected throughout that process because she purported to be a victim of rape, even though every story of rape that she told, there were multiple stories, turned out to be, debunked. And here, this is an example of media confirmation bias at its best. From the very get-go, the media rushed in and said, and politicians too, Tucker, rushed in and said, this attack was horrible. They immediately hashtag believed Jesse. And there was no stopping and thinking about, does this smell right? What are the facts here? And look, now it sounds like the prosecutors believe that there was a false report. They have brought charges. And, I would like to see what the evidence is, his phone records, his...
I mean, I don't know what the evidence is either, but I know a BS story when I see one. I thought it from day one. But why the media, which is paid to be skeptical and paid to chase down facts, are the ones demanding that we believe? I mean, Robin Roberts on ABC colluded with this guy to perpetuate his hoax. The other channels, the dishonest ones we compete against, are not even covering this development, apparently. Why would reporters fall for this before everyone else?
Well, that's a great question, Tucker. It's exactly why Justice Thomas was correct in raising yesterday in the Supreme Court why we need to rethink that New York Times versus Sullivan standard, which is the actual malice standard that was applied in the Warren Court back in the 1960s, which has insulated the media from liability in these cases. And this confirmation bias is a real problem. And
I totally agree.
An informed American electorate is important, and the media is responsible for helping the American electorate be properly informed.
That's right. And we're falling down on the job, I would say. More us being the media. Libby Locke, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
One of the few people with direct experience in these stories. We put immense trust in the FBI. They have immense power. So what do we do when its top officials expose themselves as nuts, Russia conspiracy theorists? It's an important question, and we'll address it after the break.
All right, it's time right now.
Ignoring your urges to go. Get Super Beta Prostate.
I think Andrew McCabe has made a fool out of himself over the last couple of days, and he really looks to me like sort of a poor man's J. Edgar Hoover. I think he's a disaster.
That was the president weighing in on Andrew McCabe's recent book tour. Americans put a lot of trust in the FBI. They have no choice. It's our top law enforcement agency. FBI officials are supposed to be adults, supposed to be immune to hysteria and fads, and above all, immune to political pressure. But the last couple of years have shaken the public's faith that any of that is true. Jim Comey grandstanded for attention. Sometimes he helped Hillary Clinton, other times he hurt Hillary Clinton, but it was always all about him. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, we know, swapped hysterical texts that were also dumb. And when it comes to Russia, Andy McCabe sounds worse than any CNN anchor. Here's one selection.
I don't know that we have ever seen in all of history an example of the volume and the significance of the contacts between people in and around the president and his campaign with our most serious, our existential international enemy, the government of Russia.
Quick, define existential. I bet you can't. Of course he can't. McCabe also recently said that he wouldn't be surprised if the president were taking orders from Russia.
Do you still believe the president could be a Russian asset?
I think it's possible. I think that's why we started our investigation, and I'm really anxious to see where Director Mueller concludes that.
Well, there's no evidence of that, but you don't need it. He has a feeling, and hopefully we'll get some facts. New reports today indicate the release of Robert Mueller's final report could be imminent. Who knows? Eli Lake has been covering this stuff for a long time. He's a Bloomberg opinion columnist now, and he joins us today. So, Eli, to me, speaking as a citizen, it's not really about Trump or the Democratic Congress. It's about whether you can trust your most powerful institution domestically, which is the FBI. And if the former deputy director is saying with a straight face, no, he could be a Russian agent on the basis of really no evidence, that seems so reckless and scary to me.
It's harder to justify that, especially 2 years into the administration.
Yes.
President Trump has appointed Russia hawks at the highest levels of the government.
Noticed.
He has, in a lot of cases, not every single one, countered Russian interests directly. The most recent example being Venezuela, selling lethal arms to Ukraine. So there's been no quo to the quid. And the quid has yet to be established after more than 2 years of an investigation from the FBI, which is to say, the initial theory was that there was a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia to distribute, steal the emails from the DNC and John Podesta, and that there was coordination in some ways with the Trump campaign to help Russia influence the election. Well, I think most people believe that the Russians certainly tried to influence the election, but the other part of that, which is that coordination, not only hasn't been proven, according to the indictment of Roger Stone, they didn't know what were in the emails. That Roger Stone was trying to figure it out from WikiLeaks. And the Trump campaign had asked Roger Stone to find out what was in the emails if they were coordinating. Don't you think that why would they have to go to Julian Assange?
So if you really wanted to help Russia, you'd want to spike natural gas prices because that's the Russian economy. And the fastest way to do that would be to take the richest natural gas fields in the world offline with the Green New Deal. So I don't really understand. So the very people who are saying that the United States should stop the production of fossil fuels are claiming that Trump, who promotes the production of fossil fuels, is somehow on Russia's side. Like, it seems insane to me.
Well, Russia, in fairness, Trump gets into trouble sometimes. I think in 2016, when he said, Russia, if you're listening, you should leak the Hillary emails and things like that. And there are moments where the Helsinki summit from last summer is another example where he will say things that I think most people, including myself, would sort of scratch their heads like, where is this coming from? Why is he being so deferential to Putin? But what we haven't seen is any kind of follow through in terms of the policy, nor
the bedrock interests.
Yeah, right. Nor have we seen the evidence that there was in all of these meetings that have come out and things that he's talking about and all these contacts. Well, we have yet to see anything coming close to that initial claim.
So it just seems like, look, if you're Ralph Peters or some kind of, hysterical person on TV making historical claims, that, that's fine. But if you're the deputy director of the FBI, or just have been, or the director of the FBI, and you command a massive domestic army that's heavily armed and can crush and kill people, then you have an obligation not to be reckless in the things you say in cable news, right?
Right. This was the first few months into the administration. I think the FBI really was freaking out. What's less understandable to me, and I think is completely baffling, is Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. Because according to McCabe, Rosenstein was frantically meeting with him and other senior leaders of the FBI, proposing maybe the invocation of the 25th Amendment, wearing a wire, doing all these, and ultimately leading to the appointment of Robert Mueller as a special counsel. But it was Rod Rosenstein who originally helped basically come up with a memo justifying the firing of Comey. So how is he on both sides of that issue?
No,
and it's like, the argument that I get from reading between the lines, and I've read a bit of the book now from McCabe, is that there would be no investigation. They wouldn't have launched this investigation. We wouldn't have gotten Mueller if only Trump had stuck to the initial cover story that that obscured his real reasons for firing Comey. If only he said it was all about Hillary Clinton, then we wouldn't have, according to McCabe, and that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense, and I'm even more confused, but grateful that you tried to explain their reasoning. Ilya Lake, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, they joined a jihad against the West. Now several ISIS brides want to come home, and their supporters say it's racist to prevent them. Nigel Farage on that after the break.
$67.30 or visit us online at zonaplus.com.
It's been almost 16 years since the United States invaded Iraq in order to overthrow the regime of Saddam Hussein. Spring of 2003, you remember. In the end, more than 4,000 American troops died in that war. Tens of thousands more were maimed. And, of course, more than 100,000 Iraqi civilians died as well. The whole thing cost this country more than $1 trillion, and the ripple effects are still obvious. In fact, it's really hardly a stretch to say that without the Iraq invasion, there would be no Syrian civil war, no ISIS, no European migrant crisis. And for that matter, there might be no President Trump, who ran against that war. The Iraq War turned out to be our most momentous and costliest foreign policy action since Vietnam. And it might have been worth it if we got something out of it in the end. But did we? We didn't make the region safer. The weapons of mass destruction that justified the invasion never existed. And that's a fact worth remembering the next time the government and the New York Times align to assure you that something is absolutely true, for real. It may not be true. It often isn't true. But for a broader answer to whether it was worth it or not, there is a new 2-volume, 1,300-page study of the war and its consequences. It was produced by the Army War College and was released last month to very little notice. The conclusions of the study are grim. Years of warfare in Iraq failed to create a thriving democracy there, or even really a stable government. Our much vaunted coalition of allies didn't work very well, since most allies sent only token forces, too few to be useful. A handful of countries did all the real work. Keep that in mind when they tell you how critical NATO is. But the most damning part of the report is its conclusion that the Iraq War really only had one winner. The winner was not America, it wasn't Iraq. According to the report's authors, quote, an emboldened and expansionist Iran appears to be the only victor of the Iraq War. Oof. Will any of these lessons get noticed in Washington? Well, almost nobody has paid any price at all for embroiling this country in the Iraq disaster. The biggest advocates of the war are still around, and amazingly, many are still influential. Bill Kristol, Max Boot, John Bolton. Many of these people want to repeat the Iraq War on a larger scale if they can in Syria or Libya or Yemen or Venezuela or Iran itself. They've learned nothing, and they may get their chance to do it again. But before they do, they ought to write a book report on the Army War College report. ISIS has been all but destroyed in Syria, and now followers who gleefully abandoned the West and went over there to help are trying to slink back home. Hoda Muthana is one of them. She fled the U.S. to join the caliphate and marry an ISIS fighter. Now she says she deserves to return without any serious punishment.
I don't know. I thought I was doing things correctly for the sake of God. And when I came here and I saw everything with my own eyes, I realized that I made a big mistake. And I know I ruined my future and my son's future, and I'm deeply, deeply regretting.
Do you think you deserve a punishment for what you did?
Maybe therapy lessons, maybe a process that will ensure us that we'll never do this again.
Therapy so she'll never join ISIS again. Okay. As in the case of many issues, the UK is dealing with the same problem, but it's even worse over there. Their former ISIS bride is not even sorry. Many are not sorry at all for what they did, but still want to come back and no doubt live off taxpayers they waged jihad against. Watch.
I think a lot of people should have sympathy towards me for everything I've been through. You know, they don't really have proof that I did anything that is dangerous.
They had beheaded people. There were executions.
Yeah, I knew about those things, and I was okay with it. I did have a good time there. It's just at the end things got harder. Please don't give up on trying to get me back. I really don't want to stay here.
Yeah, I was okay with the beheadings, but you should feel sorry for me. Now, so far, these people have been kept from returning to the UK, but at least one columnist has already called that racist. Nigel Farage once led the UK Independence Party, of course, and he joins us tonight. Nigel Farage, thanks very much for coming on. So how much would you have to hate your own country to publicly argue it is, quote, racist not to allow someone who approved of beheadings while living with an ISIS fighter back into your country?
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole thing about international law. So if we were to say, as a country, to Shamemba Begin, she can't come back to our country, we're taking your passport away, we would be making her stateless, and that is what our political class are scared of doing. But the fact is, she chose to leave us, she worked with a direct enemy of our country, of our values. As far as I'm concerned, she's not stateless, she's Islamic State. And I don't want her back in my country under any circumstances. And for those that say, look, she was only a 15-year-old kid, she made a mistake. Well, Christian forgiveness is based on people first repenting of their sins. And as you said, you know, her casual attitude towards beheads, you know, fighters who've been beheaded, and she found them in the bin and she was okay with it. No, you know, it's possible, always possible, to forgive people for sins, but they've got to recognise what they've done wrong first. I don't want her back, but I fear our country is much weaker than yours when it comes to defending our values, and I fear she is coming back.
I mean, it seems, since you do live in a democracy, that there would be a market for some politician to stand up and say, you know, I'm not hating anybody else, but my first job is to protect our citizens. Why don't you have a national politician who will say that?
Well, occasionally one does say that, and then they get abused, as you say, called racist, called extreme, all the things I've been called over these years. There is a consensus amongst British politicians that you don't tackle these issues. It's too awkward. And of course, remember, we have a growing Muslim minority within the United Kingdom, and the fear is, if we say these things, we'll alienate that community and they won't vote for us in the future. And cynically, Tucker, that, I think, is at the top of the list.
I mean, it's hard. I mean, maybe the majority of British Muslims support ISIS. I would doubt it.
They don't.
I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of reasonable people who, you know, see this kind of behavior as discrediting to them and wrong. I mean, I would certainly hope so, but also sort of like, who cares? Shouldn't somebody be brave enough to tell the truth that that's just wrong behavior?
And this is a very important point. The vast majority of British Muslims, you know, are integrating into our way of life. They're appalled by what ISIS have done, by what this young woman has done, because it makes their lives in their communities more difficult and tougher for their kids to integrate. And the key here is we in the West must not launch a crusade against an entire religion. We must launch it against the extremes of that religion and get moderate Islam on our side in this great battle. But you don't do that by being weak. You do it by being strong.
That's exactly right. Nigel Farage, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, CNN is under fire from outside and from within for hiring a former Trump administration staffer. Is this the first political person hired by a news network? We'll investigate after the break.
Stories from our country's most iconic places. New episodes of What Made America Great. Available now on Fox Nation. Start your free trial today.
This is a Fox News alert. Jussie Smollett's legal team has released a statement in response to the felony charges filed by Chicago police. Quote, like any other citizen, Mr. Smollett enjoys the presumption of innocence, particularly when there has been an investigation like this one, where information, both true and false,